All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. This means a lot to me. Also, this program really means a lot to me because, the reason I became an interdisciplinary studies student is because none of the majors really kind of interested me, and none of the majors kind of worked with my way of self-learning. And I think that's really important to be an independent researcher and not kind of have a discipline tell you what you need to know. Having a discipline telling you how to learn, I think, is really important and helped me a lot in publishing, I guess, this research, or at least having it published in the future. I want to thank Steve McAlpin for having these crazy meetings with me for the past 2 years, and just talking and just figuring things out as we go. Dr. Norcia, sitting back there, who's a professor of information systems, had another coffee-fueled chats, which was really good in the morning. Professor Durant, which unfortunately couldn't be here, he was a professor of photography, and I took one of his classes and helped me kind of understand the nuances of visual narrative, if that means anything to you. So yeah, and of course, Dr. Freeland and I we haven't gotten, it's only been a semester, but yeah, you've been cool so far, so you're good on my yeah. So I want to preface this project with a small anecdote. Before I started this whole thing, I watched this movie called WALL-E. Have you guys heard of this movie, right? Mm-hmm. So at the end of the movie, I cried a lot. So I'm sitting on my couch, I'm hugging my teddy bear, and I'm bawling. And I realized that this was interesting because I had, over the course of the 2-hour duration, developed this relationship with the trash-eating robot. Enough that it made me cry. And that there was so much meaning in this story that it really kind of elicited this emotional and physiological reaction. Being the interdisciplinarian that I am, I found that was really fascinating. I think that was kind of the starting point for understanding how narrative can be structured as a kind of a tool in a way to kind of bring out these kind of emotions. And I think that aspect is kind of what defines my whole project. So designing with stories, I explore how narrative creates meaning or value, and how it elicits an emotional or physiological reaction, and how we can use that for me as a software designer, how I can use that to make really engaging and really lovable user experiences on the web. So I'm going to read to you my introduction for my project. So the goal of designing with stories is to study the design of web applications and interactive experiences in the same way that one would study a piece of film or literature. So throughout my capstone, I explore the value of meaning in design and how this affects the end user, and how software experiences really at the end of the day are designed much like a novel or a screenplay. So how to study software like you're studying literature is kind of tricky. So the only way I could really do this is by taking different disciplines, by studying films by Stanley Kubrick, by reading literature, by understanding how the world's best storytellers told their story, and to use their techniques and to kind of transition that into the digital experience. And so I read a lot of short story books, like how to write short stories, film books talking about the techniques that filmmakers use, talking about panning and editing. Even game design and industrial design use a lot of narrative tactics. And by kind of combining all of these thought patterns, it kind of helped me in understanding how narrative can be used. And so this is kind of how it breaks down. There's 3 main disciplines that I focus on in studying narrative. The first is art and design. It kind of helped me understand the visual aspects of narrative. Information systems, in my field, they help me understand the mechanics of how that narrative can be built physically through code and through user research. And English and literary analysis to help me understand kind of the fundamental aspects of more traditional types of narrative. And so in these 3 disciplines, I took classes that helped me understand these kind of constables, I guess, of narrative. So in information, so all of these disciplines use narrative in their own kind of unique ways. And so they all kind of culminate in 3 main questions. And so the first question is, how do these disciplines define meaning and value? They all use narrative, and narrative creates meaning in some way. So how do they use meaning to do certain things? So like in art and design, typography is used as more of a way of visually communicating through text, certain aspects of I guess whatever the book you're reading or whatever you're reading. In information systems, narrative is used a lot in user research. Understanding users is inherently a narrative process. You're telling stories about users, who they are and what they are, and eventually you can design applications based on these stories. And with literary analysis, kind of like the mechanics of a story, what make up a story, plot, setting, character development. These are all kind of these elemental parts of narrative. And secondly, what techniques do storytellers of all mediums use to create meaningful experiences? So like I said, all of these disciplines use narrative in certain ways. And then finally, at the end of the day, how might we incorporate these techniques in the web application design process? How do we bring it all together? And then how do we use narrative, for me as an interaction designer, to make lovable, fun web experiences? And so I'm going to read for you an excerpt of how I did that. So these are kind of the main points of narrative. These are the distilled elements of how to tell a story and how to create meaning, since meaning is, made through stories. And so I picked characterization because I think characterization is really fascinating. So narrative revolves around the interaction and subsequent development between one or more characters during a period of time. All stories have characters. Interaction designers deal with a unique form of characterization and character development, and one that's balanced between two distinct types of users or characters. You have users, the people using an app, like, I'm going to use Facebook to interact with my friends, and those are kind of the characters in that kind of contained play. In addition to the service of the web application itself being its own character. When I'm on Facebook, if you notice the status bar says, "What are you doing today?" This character is prompting me to share my details with it. So I'm interacting with this kind of unique character. And so designing for these two types of characters is like critical in ensuring that the web experience is both relatable and human. So that it makes sense. And so my project is structured, it's a short book, it's about 100 some pages. And it's kind of structured around these previous narrative elements here. And so this is the characterization section. So in this particular example, MailChimp, which is like an email service provider, they kind of make these like character cards. They're called personas, and actually a lot of companies do this in the software design process. And so they take these different types of users, right, and they talk about their characteristics in such a way that helps the designers at the end know what kind of aspects of the interface they're going to be affected. So for this guy's, I don't know if you can read this guy's a developer, right? So they talk about him being a techie. He's tech savvy, he's mobile, he's a profiteer, an aggregator. So he's this very logical thinking human being, which he experiences a web app in a different way than, say, the PR manager looks at. Educated, social, smart. Not that he's not smart. Busy, advanced. She's kind of on the go. She's not really worried about the mechanics of everything. So when she looks at a web app, she's not, she's uncomfortable looking at a terminal, whereas this guy can look at a terminal and think it's like home. And so they do this for, I guess, all aspects of the pages and the interface, and it kind of helps the designers again like figure out how to make the experience more human. And then for applications as their own characters, one of the best examples I came across was in Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, who's a comic book theorist. He talked about how cars, when you're in a car, in a way, almost over time, you develop this relationship with your car, and it becomes this kind of character. If you had an old car and you're going up a hill, you're kind of going like, come on, buddy. You're talking to this car, you're like interacting with this character, and it becomes, in the end, it becomes a part of yourself, and it becomes an extension of how you kind of experience the world. And I think that's how web applications, in many ways, are kind of structured. And you use Facebook. You don't think about using Facebook. It just kind of becomes a part of your life. If you're at a party and you're taking pictures, you just kind of think about using Instagram to share that experience and Facebook to share that experience. So that's just one chapter, one small brief excerpt from my book. And it should be published in the next, I want to say next week, I guess the 11th, right? That's when the whole thing is due. So, so yeah, and that's pretty much it. So thanks for listening. Yeah.
Thank you, Louis. Questions?
Have you got an example of someone in the design space who's put all these elements together?
What do you mean by that?
Is there a guru, I mean, a person who's done what you're
Right.
proposing?
So there's different disciplines that are kind of focused on user research and I guess like narrative design. So on the more technical side, on the more like user research side, you have a guy named Jacob Nielsen, and he wrote a couple books. One is Designing Web Usability, and it's kind of like the Bible of the science of interaction design, and by understanding how color affects the way people think and understanding kind of the psychology of white space and all these kind of design elements. He's done a lot of case studies and really scientific research into understanding like kind of how the brain works when looking at a screen. But on the more, I guess on the less scientific side, there's a guy named, what's his name? He's the one who designed MailChimp. He wrote a book called Designing for Emotion. And he talks a little bit about the psychology, but more about how to make people, like why people love things and why people use apps as a way, kind of as an extension of their character, kind of like how Scott McCloud talked about his stuff. So yeah, so there's different types of, I guess, camps talking about narrative design. And at the end of the day, narrative, they've done psychological studies where the reason narrative is so, I guess, impactful for humans is because we have this like predilection for receiving narrative, because it's the way we communicate the human experience, right? Because when we talk about, back in the day, I used to do this, I used to go to my dad's house and go here and go there, that you're telling the story. So I guess narrative is like a reflection of how we experience our lives. So that answers your question. Sure.
Louis, could you talk a little bit more about how the field or your research in particular is interdisciplinary?
Yeah. So I guess it's just like there's so many, you can't really talk about storytelling in application design with really one discipline. It doesn't really work. Because they're going to cross-reference each other, and when you talk about psychology, immediately you're going to be talking about in my case, you're going to be talking about design elements, and you're going to be inevitably talking about how that design, how typography, for instance, is even created, from a mechanical standpoint. So I guess for me, the approach, I guess it was like a redefinition approach, in that I kind of wanted to redefine what narrative was, but more in like a technological context. So. Sure.
Following on that, so a very mechanical question, but is there a methodology at work in you bringing together these different elements?
Sure. I think the methodology that I used, let me put this full screen again. The methodology that I used was borrowed particularly from this book, right?
Right.
So story writing. It was divided in what they call the elements of narrative. So they brought it out into time, setting, plot, pace, character development. So they talked about they broke down kind of the individual units of narrative that work together to create something that's bigger than each one of them individually. So the characters by themselves don't mean as much as the plot that these particular characters are in. So that kind of extra piece is what Mariella, I guess I had it, called substance. And so it's by studying substance in both, not even just literature, but also film, because they create substance in different ways, I was able to kind of use that as like a framework for talking about interactive experiences. So I guess each medium, whether you're talking about film, whether you're talking about literature, they have their own kind of devices and kind of inspiring reasons for people to care. And so interactive experiences there's different ways for them to do that. So I think that's also why understanding video games was like a huge help, in the mechanics of why people get kind of addicted to video games and what's the reason for people playing them and kind of relating to them. So
Do you find the same terminology when you play in story?
yeah, you really do. You find it's almost it's weird because I'm reading this book. This was published in the 30s, and I'm reading it as if it's kind of this like newfound text for me. Like it's like something that's so different. And I just realized that really web applications they're functional and they're supposed to do something, but they also make you feel something, and they also make you they mean something to you. So by understanding what meaning is, it kind of goes across the board. You can go and study, Plato. You can study the old philosophers and how the Greek poets and how they kind of inspired their audiences. And it's the same thing. People responded to that narrative in the same way that if someone's going through a news feed and someone gets engaged, you get, really kind of excited or kind of like annoyed that person's even like getting engaged at 20 years old or something. You know what I mean? So, no offense to anyone who's gotten engaged. Yeah, sorry. You're cool. You're cool. Yeah.
From your own research for the Interdisciplinary project, do you have any reading recommendations for someone interested in reading further in the subject?
Sure. There's actually a series of books by a man named, what's his name? Jeffrey Zeldman. I actually met him by chance at a job fair in New York, which was like really cool. We talked for like 15 minutes and he was super into this. But he has a series of books called A List Apart by a bunch of different authors. And they really talk about the art of web design as opposed to the science and the mechanics of web design. And so if you want to check out how to view web design as an art, you really want to check out the A List Apart blog or the A Book Apart book series. Those are awesome. I think I'm going to petition to have the library have those in because there is such an invaluable research for anyone in the software design or web design industry. So
You could also buy your book.
you could also buy. No, I'm not going to make anyone buy it. You can just download it. It's fine.
Where?
I think I have it on my personal website, or I don't know. I'll figure out some way for everyone to download it. So yeah, sure.
So, you said that you're reading this book, it's from the 30s, and it's like a textbook, you're reading directly from what you hear web designers sort of talking about or
Right.
writing about. So my question was, well, where is all of this coming from? So is this just, this is how humans deal with things, or this is how folks, regardless of what the media is, what the medium is, how they tell stories?
Right.
Or are these web designers reading something that help inform how they put together narrative?
So what it is that I guess at its basic, the mediums don't really even matter, right? So the stories are told for a certain reason. And for the most part, stories have been told as a form of entertainment or as a form of translating cultural values or kind of teaching lessons. In web development, it's pretty much the same, except for that designers tell stories in such a way to elicit reactions for someone to buy a product or for someone to donate money to a particular campaign. Websites can be structured using narrative in a way to push people to act on certain things. Like a good example was this website that's like railing against daylight savings and how terrible of an outdated system it was. And when I first saw it, I was like, all right, like it can't be that big of a deal. But it's this long form site, and I'm reading through it, and towards the end, I was like kind of convinced. I was like, you know what, this like is kind of an outdated system. Maybe if we did away with it, maybe it might make things a little bit easier. And so that story that they were presenting allowed me to kind of understand their point of view. And at the bottom it said like sign the petition. I didn't sign the petition, but at the same time, like I could see why someone would, and I can see how that narrative was powerful enough to kind of even suggest to me that maybe you should. So that's just one small example.
Well, just a quick follow-up.
Mhm.
But I guess I want a little more here,
Okay.
or I want to pick your brain a little more
Sure.
here.
Because
Because
to be fair,
Oh,
maybe
sorry.
can we reduce it to a sentence answer, or is it better?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
how do you know whether or not the story you created is correct or not? Because if you're a web designer, you want to know, is this going to be successful?
Right.
Is it not going to be successful?
I guess the main, if you boil down to it, are people buying things or not? Like if you are the lead interaction designer for eBay, and they're asking you to make eBay a little bit more profitable, so you would want to know, I guess you would want to structure that narrative of these auctions in such a way that pushes people to buy things. So the first thing that people, I guess that for an interaction designer, it's a lot of small details, but things like there's this orange bar at the bottom of auctions that are ending soon, and there's a ticker that's ticking down, and so that kind of inspires someone that is looking at it and says, you know, like, wow, if I don't act now, like I may miss out on this auction, I may not be able to buy it. So I guess to see whether narrative is working, you got to look at, you know, how many people are engaged with the site and who's buying.
Thank you. I really apologise for
Sure, yeah.
So let me just say thank you very much, Louis Queral.
Thanks.